Hello, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Unmasking series. The voice I had to unlearn. There's a voice I used to carry with me everywhere I went, of course, and it sounded like me, but y'all, the voice just was not mine. The voice that I had heard most wasn't even God's voice. It was made up of phrases that I heard while I was growing up, like, you're too much, you can't do that, you think you're better than us. Um, be grateful for what you get, phrases like that. Some of these comments did come from home, some of them came from outside of home, and I believed those voices because they came from people that I was taught to trust, like family, church folks, teachers, friends, etc. And so, when you're young and growing up, when you're a kid, you don't question things. That's what we're taught. Do what you're told. You adapt because you have to. Like, what's going to happen if you don't? You're going to get bullied by some grown like child, adult. And so naturally, as a child, you learn how to shrink. I learned how to shrink. I second guessed. I softened my voice to make people comfortable. I walk into rooms and immediately made myself small, even when I knew I had something to say. Not necessarily because I wasn't confident, but because I just didn't feel safe to be seen. And I remember being in school, maybe around sixth or seventh grade. I had all these ideas like most of us do. I was very passionate, creative, and even talkative at some point in my life. But one day, I heard a kid say, "You think you all that?" Like I just wasn't worth a dime. And it wasn't the first time that I had heard that. But for some reason at that time, it just stuck. Not because they were right, but because I just started to internalize that you're doing too much. People are uncomfortable around you. And so that very script that I made up followed me into adulthood, right into relationships, of course. I'd shrink. I'd say it's fine when it wasn't. Um, I didn't want to be labeled, as dramatic or difficult or needy. So quite naturally, I just adjusted and made myself easier to handle. And so I silenced myself just to keep the peace. But one day, after yet another conversation where I downplayed what I really wanted to say, and I paused and I asked myself this time, who told you that? Because that voice was playing in my head again. Um, like, who told you you were too much? Who told you that you had to earn space? Who told you that you were a problem? And that question just cracked something open in me because the truth was that voice wasn't mine. That was a voice that was inherited. And just because it's familiar doesn't mean that it's faithful. And that's something that I had to learn. And that brings me to a scripture. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And so when I read that scripture with fresh eyes, I hear God saying, you don't have to conform to the patterns that kept your grandmother silent or your mom silent. You don't have to repeat that same smallness that felt like safety in your childhood. So you don't have to shrink in the name of humility, because it just wasn't it's not who I am, it's not who I was called to be. And that's when I knew I had to stay in therapy, of course, because I had to figure that out. I had to peel that back. And, because that's what it is, it's layers. And therapy will have you unpacking things that you thought you buried. And I was finally able to name the difference between God's voice and that voice of fear, shame, and people pleasing. And in one session, I said out loud for the very first time, I don't think I've ever truly known what it's like to speak without editing myself. And so my therapist, of course, asked me, so what would it sound like if you stopped editing? That was the moment. I sat there in silence, tears just sitting in my throat because I didn't even know. I didn't even know. I had spent so many years adjusting my volume, my dreams, my emotions, my joy, just to fit in spaces that were never designed to hold me whole. But I made a decision in that room that day to reclaim my voice, to let her be heard again, to speak like I belong, not like I was borrowing space. And girl, let me just tell you, when you start speaking from a healed place, um, when you start like, or when you stop repeating the lies that trauma whispered and fear reinforced, that's when you start walking and talking different. And I don't mean just go off and say anything. You know, you'll know the difference. You won't just say anything. You know, you'll be impeccable with your words. You will say what you mean and mean what you say, and you won't be speaking from like this overly emotional space. You start commanding rooms without saying a word, because you don't always have to. You start unlearning smallness, like it was never yours to carry and it wasn't for me. It's not for you. So let me ask you something. What voice are you listening to? Does it sound like shame or truth? Does it sound like fear or freedom? Does it sound like people pleasing or purpose? You have the power to write a new script. You can speak truth over yourself. You can unlearn the patterns that never belong to you. You can shine without an apology. Because, girl, your voice is not a problem, it's your gift. And it's time you start using it again. So drop a comment in the comment section. Drop a comment in the section if you're reclaiming your voice. Tag a sister who's unlearned in silence, and subscribe. Share this with someone who's ready to sound like heaven and not hurt. We are unmasking, we are unfolding, and we are coming home. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon. Peace.